You may recall that about 2 weeks ago, some discourse started in regards to a new PlayStation 5 model. It's a new SKU that is essentially the same as the old one, but with a few adjustments here and there. It's not a PS5 to PS5 Slim or whatever kind of upgrade, but rather more of a PS5 1.1 rather than a PS5 2.0, if that makes sense, which happens all the time with consoles. They do these small revisions here and then release new SKUs, and one of them was cited by this Twitter user. Eventually, that version of the PlayStation 5, the new one, did release, and people started to get their hands on it and see if there were any substantial differences that were of note. And one of the things that Austin Evans, who was one of the first to cover this, noticed is that the new PS5 Digital is almost 300 grams lighter than the original, which raised questions as to what changed, what components are different internally that makes up for this difference in weight. Alongside other minor differences in quality of life improvements, like the new PS5 stand having this wider and deeper circular cave to allow people to unscrew the screw with their fingers. And on top of that, the screw itself is different on the new one compared to the original. Past all that, a major difference that Austin Evans noted was that measuring the temperature on the vents, the air that's being dissipated, on the original it was around 52 degrees, that's where it was hovering, 52 degrees Celsius, but on the new one it was noticed that the dissipated heat was a bit higher in temperature at 55 degrees Celsius, and Austin Evans generally noticed a difference between 3 to 5 degrees Celsius in terms of the air that's being expelled. Now, after the video went live, a lot of people called Austin Evans out because people believe that this was not proper testing, as higher exterior temperature, higher temperature of air that's being expelled is not a good measure of the temperature inside, the temperature of the components. It could very well be that air dissipation has changed and it may be more efficient, and that's why the air that's being expelled is hotter. More hot air is being expelled, and that could ultimately be a good thing for the console. Austin Evans insisted that he doesn't believe this to be the case because of probably the biggest difference and the thing that really accounts for the weight difference, the heatsink. On the original, you had more copper and it was just a bigger heatsink across the board, whereas in the new one, you can tell it does look like a significantly smaller heatsink with less copper. So the assumption that Austin Evans made, based on the fact that the heat dissipated from the vents was slightly higher in temperature and that the heatsink was smaller, was that the new version of the PlayStation 5 was doing a worse job of cooling the console and its internal components and the chips. And in response to people pointing out that the higher temperature and heat dissipation could mean that the heat is being dissipated more efficiently, Austin Evans responded with a couple of people mentioning higher exhaust temps could mean the cooler is doing a better job of dissipating heat. The thing is, Sony removed a sizable amount of the heatsink on this new model. With fewer fins and smaller heat pipes, it simply isn't as efficient at moving the heat out of the console. And with that assumption in mind, he titled the video, "The New PS5 is Worse." But it would turn out that he would actually be wrong on all accounts. Another YouTuber going by the name Hardware Busters did the more, I guess, scientific testing, where he actually delved into the console's internals and measured the internal components' temperature, the power usage, and all that jazz. And what he discovered was that the new PS5 is actually better at cooling the APU of the PlayStation 5, APU being essentially a GPU, CPU hybrid kind of thing that's specifically used for consoles like the PlayStation 5. Despite the smaller heatsink, it turns out that the new PS5 is actually better, and that the higher heat output is because heat is actually being dissipated more efficiently. This is an 11-minute long video. I'd recommend you check it out if you want to do so. But if you just want the basic summary, here's an article by News Outlet Ars Technica that does a pretty good job of just paraphrasing everything. But yeah, the headline says it all. Further testing shows new PS5 smaller, lighter heatsink keeps console cooler. New testing refutes assertions that a smaller heatsink means a hotter console. Scrolling down, Ars Technica details how the Hardware Busters tested all of this. He measured the temperature of the APU, memory, voltage regulator modules, VRMs, and exhaust air while Devil May Cry 5 was running on both PS5 models. So he used a single game to ensure that all of the PS5s were working under the same conditions, under the same workload. Now, there are a few areas in PS5's internals where the temperature did rise, but it's in less important areas. Memory and VRM temperatures in the new PS5 rise a bit. The memory temperature goes up by around 7 degrees Celsius, and the VRM temperature goes up by around 1.3 degrees Celsius. But neither increase should have a huge impact on the console's reliability or longevity, both increases being quite negligible and certainly a worthwhile trade-off for the cooler APU here. As noted by Ars Technica, the new PS5's APU ran about 11 degrees cooler, dropping from about 51 degrees Celsius to 40 degrees Celsius, which is actually pretty significant. Now, just like with Austin Evans, testing did show that the exhaust air is indeed a few degrees warmer in the new PS5 than the old one, but exhaust air temperature is nowhere near as relevant as the actual onboard temperature of the chips, and that's where it was discovered that the APU is noticeably cooler. Hardware busters also tested other aspects of PS5's cooling, like the number and type of fans, the fan speed, and the noise level, comparing the old PS5 with the newer model. And on these fronts, it turns out that both versions of the console are either identical or nearly identical. For example, with noise level, the new PS5 model is apparently about 1 decibel louder, which is not something you're really going to notice. And it was noted that the newer model does draw a bit more power. Its power consumption under most circumstances was a couple of watts higher, and some of the analysis I've seen out there is that this could be attributed to the fact that because the APU on the newer model runs cooler, that allows the APU to work a bit harder, and so you're going to see a bit more power being drawn. But ultimately, that's actually a good thing because it actually makes the APU run a bit more efficiently than on the original model of the PlayStation 5. It certainly disproves the narrative that a smaller heatsink will always yield hotter temperatures for hardware's internals, and it disproves the notion that the new PS5 is worse, when in fact it's actually a little bit better. It's marginally better. It would seem as though Sony and PlayStation both managed to reduce the cost of making PS5 slightly by reducing the size of the heatsink, while also making the console a little cooler, or at the very least made it so that the APU runs cooler while other components just run a little bit hotter, which is a more efficient management of heat within the console. The initial worry out there was that the new version of the PS5 is actually inferior, that initial adopters will have a console that will be more future-proof because components will deteriorate slower because it ultimately runs cooler. But first of all, regardless of which version of the PS5 you have, you'll be fine. Again, these differences really won't be earth-shattering. Both versions are close enough in design, and both versions are close enough in temperatures that in terms of performance and long-term viability of the console, you're really not going to see much of a difference. But it's still good to get this clarification so that we can have some more definitive facts that can inform the discourse that is going on right now, because Austin Evans, by labeling the video the new PS5 is worse, and with some of the stuff he said in the video, it really made people speculate that the new version was tangibly worse. Some of the claims that Austin Evans made here include,
well, we know it's not as efficient because it runs hotter. I don't want to make any bold claims here, but that doesn't seem good.
No, there's no scenario in which this is good. Even with a very brief test, this one runs hotter.
That doesn't seem wise, considering that the PS5, like you said, changes its wattage based on what's going on in the console.
You could actually lose performance. The very first update we've seen less than a year into the PS5, I don't think there's any argument that this is a worse console, at least for thermals and for the cooling. I would rather have a launch PS5
especially if you're putting an SSD in your console, dude. Even if you have that heatsink, that SSD is gonna get hot, and if this one has worse cooling, you're gonna have trouble with that SSD.
There you have it, friends. The PS5 is exposed. We've now determined the true root of all evils, which is about 300 grams of copper and aluminum heatsinks.
Yeah, that did not age well. So you can see Austin Evans definitely blew this out of proportion, and he definitely jumped the gun. I don't think he had ill intent, and I kind of get why those would be natural assumptions. Smaller heatsink, hotter heat on the back. It's gotta mean that the console runs hotter, right? but he didn't actually do proper testing and made conclusions and spread a narrative that was straight up factually false, creating concerns about the newer version of the PlayStation 5. But for those who were worried about the differences here, well, there's actually no reason to worry. If anything, if you bought a newer PlayStation 5 model, you've probably got the best version. So with all said and done, almost nothing changes for PlayStation 5 users. They're still basically the same PlayStation 5s, but for those who needed that ease of mind, just in case and just get the facts straight, here you go. So there you have it, folks. This is one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the latest developments surrounding PlayStation 5's newer model and its smaller heatsink. Share your thoughts below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.